Alright YouTube, so we are back of course to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and today we were going to do a bit of a different video. I kind of want to talk about just the FF7 compilation sort of as a whole, but I was going to dedicate a good portion of that video kind of talking about Genesis, and decided to just do a video about Genesis. Now the idea of this video of course comes off the heels of the Yuffie DLC reveal, where we see that they're digging into the compilation of Final Fantasy VII for Remake. We see the character of Vice, even though he's supposed to just be like a battle simulator character or something like that, a fight or whatever. We also see deep ground characters, which I think in a roundabout way kind of confirms that a good portion of the compilation will be incorporated into the Remake story, because prior to Remake ever coming out, before we ever got to play it, I don't think anybody thought they would reference G-type soldiers, which directly kind of references Genesis, of course. And I highly doubt that anybody would have guessed that we'd be seeing deep ground soldiers in the character of Vice within Remake, but yet, here we are. Now, before we even really get into it, I know there's two controversial things when it comes to Genesis that we got to talk about. For one, people just simply do not like the character of Genesis. I'm indifferent. I don't hate him. I'm not a big fan of him. I don't love the character, but I'm a big fan of Crisis Core. I've never hated the character when I've played Crisis Core. But for some reason, a lot of people do hate him, and I kind of understand that. But that also doesn't mean that Square Enix wouldn't use the character just because, a portion of the fans do not like him, regardless of how big that portion might be. And the second thing, and probably the more important thing here, is, of course, Gact, who the character of Genesis is modeled after. A lot of people think that they won't ever really use the character of Genesis again or remaster Crisis Core, so on and so forth, because of Gact. Some allegations he had in the past, rape allegations, and from what I've seen, he wasn't ever actually charged for it. They're just allegations, nothing was ever proven. That's what I've read. Don't know how accurate that actually is. And to be honest, in the modern era, in the last several years, a simple allegation, regardless of how true it might be, is enough for a business to no longer want to work with you ever again. And these accusations for Gact happened some years ago. I don't know exactly how long ago. But that's more of a conversation about them remastering Crisis Core. We're here to talk about Remake. And when it comes to Remake, simply put, they can just remodel the character. It doesn't have to look anything like Gact. It can look similar to Genesis, but just the face looks nothing like Gact. Because somewhere along the way, people seem to mix it up to where they think that, Square Enix cannot use the character of Genesis at all, which is simply untrue. It's their character. They can do whatever they want with it. And we know it's untrue simply because we're going to get Ever Crisis in 2022. That's going to retell us the entire FF7 compilation story. A part of that compilation story is Crisis Core. Genesis, the character, is going to be in that game. They can absolutely still use Genesis. You cannot retell the Crisis Core story without the character of Genesis, which I've seen some people mention in the past, maybe they could just remaster Crisis Core, but just cut out the character of Genesis. That's impossible. He's such a big part of that story. You cannot just cut out that character. So putting that shit aside, because those are things that people tend to mention, I don't like Genesis, so I don't want him in Remake. They can't use Genesis because of Gact, so on and so forth. Putting that shit aside, there is no technical reason that they couldn't use Genesis in Remake if they wanted to. And the fact that we're seeing Deep Ground within this Yuffie DLC, Deep Ground has a big connection to Genesis. They existed before the character of Genesis. They were a medical division of Shinra. But eventually they started experimenting on soldiers with Genesis genes because of his mutations. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that just because we're seeing Deep Ground soldiers within the Yuffie DLC, that we're going to see Genesis in the Yuffie DLC. But with us having Deep Ground characters within the Remake project now, you can't completely write off that he could be there at some point in one of the games or DLC somewhere. And of course, with Genesis being connected to Deep Ground is a big part of the Dirge of Cerberus game. You have the ending of Dirge of Cerberus, that secret ending, where you see Genesis grab Nero/Vice and fly up into the sky. That's important here. And why I say that is because that secret ending for Dirge of Cerberus is the last thing we've ever seen in the Final Fantasy VII compilation. In terms of the timeline, we're left on that cliffhanger of Genesis grabbing Nero and flying off, and we don't know what happens after that. And that's actually where Remake comes into the conversation, because we know that it is actually a part of the Final Fantasy VII compilation. It's the newest thing they've added to it. It's not just some standalone game by its own or whatever. It's actually incorporated into the timeline. From everything that we've been able to see, it seems like it's the newest thing. It seems like it's taking place after Advent Children, possibly also after Dirge of Cerberus. And given what takes place within Remake, it's more than guaranteed that this, if it is a sequel or follow-up to Advent Children, would also take place for sure, after Dirge of Cerberus. I don't know what exactly timeline-wise, who knows exactly. And given what's going on in Remake, man, there's all kinds of characters we could see. We could see Angeal in Remake. He died in Crisis Core, but so did Zack, and it does seem like Zack is also alive. If we defeated the Whisperers, and it defeats the Whisperers all throughout time, again, like I've said in the past, that has such a massive ripple effect. Who knows who's alive? That's kind of my biggest issue with the Zack living idea or theory. I don't want to necessarily bring this up because we talked about this so goddamn much on the channel, but the idea of defeating the Whisperers all throughout time has such an effect that it's absurd to even think about. And Square Enix might have this happen. We defeat them throughout time. The only repercussion of that is Zack living. That could be it, but realistically, it would have such a massive effect on the world. But jumping back to what we were talking about previously, when it comes to the remake compilation and the ending of Dirge of Cerberus, there's more of a story they wanted to tell, specifically with the character of Genesis. There is more they wanted to say and show, and that might be part of what Remake is for, given that it is a part of the compilation. And at some point throughout Remake, we might end up seeing Genesis again, so that they can continue his story. And I'm not saying that this is definitively going to happen. This is just a discussion video. This is just some speculation. We're just talking about this. And I'm not saying that anybody even wants it. Like we said previously, a lot of people aren't fans of Genesis. But they clearly wanted to do more with the character. Something I should elaborate on that I mentioned earlier is just because Remake mentions G-type soldiers, that doesn't directly reference Genesis. Genesis and Angel were a part of Project G, but the full name of the project is Project Jillian, as in Jillian Hewley, which is Angel's mother in Crisis Core. But still, whenever you hear about G-type soldiers or whatever, it does make you think of Genesis and Crisis Core and stuff like that, but I did want to kind of clear that up. So to wrap up the video and give a bit of a TLDR here at the end, back in 2006, at the end of Dirge of Cerberus, we had a cliffhanger, and that was the final thing we ever seen in the timeline of the FF7 compilation. We had stuff come out after Dirge of Cerberus, like Crisis Core, but of course that is a prequel in terms of the timeline. It's years before the events of Dirge of Cerberus. And given that Final Fantasy VII Remake seems to be, though technically it's not confirmed yet by anybody or the devs or whatever, it's just speculation by the community, but almost definitely is some sort of sequel or follow-up to everything else within the FF7 compilation that came out before it, don't be surprised if we see Genesis at some point. By the way, my dudes, that is the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys already want to update more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT, and my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Even if the morrow is barren of promises, nothing shall forestall my return.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect, we spend it with no shame, we blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.